know what it was. Maybe it's because we were sort of all fully back out after COVID and, you know, picking up on life and getting on with things again. But I think last year absolutely raced by. But don't you think a week goes quick? You know, we pack so much, don't we, into a week. Sometimes it's quite astounding. You know, you think, well, goodness me, you know, where did that week suddenly evolve to? Well, that means you're busy, doesn't it? Life's always busy. And it's good to keep busy, isn't it? Keeps us self-occupied. I'd love that luxury of boredom. You know, I think I've got to this ripe old age and I've never quite experienced it yet. Because if you're a planty person and a gardener, and I know there'll be lots of you here who are, that's the reason you're at Flower Show after all, isn't it? You know, if you're a gardener, you're never really bored, are you? You've always got something to do or a job to do. And I'm permanently on catch-up back home in my garden because, you know, you never seem to quite get on top of everything, and there's always things want lifting and splitting and dividing or chopping back. It's, you know, a never-ending thing. But at least I think the nice thing about a garden is you can spend a day in your garden and you can see where you've been, can't you? You spend a day in the house tidying up and then it just looks as bad 2 hours later, doesn't it? And don't even get me started on dusting. In fact, I don't. Life's too short to dust. The cottage that I live in, I just say, well, it's part of the charm of the cottage. Well, a little bit of dangly branches of larch going into here next, which just are so wonderful with that acidic lime green foliage. These little sort of shaggy leaves just starting to break out on the larch. And at this time of year, don't you think the trees are amazing? When all the new leaves are starting to burst back. And you just look out, don't you, at the countryside. And we are very lucky, aren't we, to be here in Yorkshire, and it is spectacular. I'm a Yorkshire boy by birth, was born just outside Sheffield, and I now live just very, very slightly over the county in North East Derbyshire. But you know, when I come to North Yorkshire, I always feel like I'm coming home when I come back to Harrogate, because my mum's maternal family came from Harrogate, so we spent lots and lots of sort of childhood days out here in Harrogate. And sort of ironically, I seem to spend half my life back in Harrogate now at flower shows and different events. But Harrogate is a beautiful town, really lovely town. A little bit of Solomon's seal. Now, this is from Cornwall, so it's earlier than ours. I don't know if you grow this in your garden, some of you, but you'll know if you have this in your garden, it's not out yet, is it? Mine's just sort of poking up there. But in a few weeks' time, it will reward us by these heavenly racemes of flower just dripping down in that very gentle little cascade of bells. And I think this is one of the nicest things to grow in the garden. I absolutely love it. If you've not got one of these, then I'm sure there'll be nurseries down in Hall 2 who are selling Solomon's seal today, so you know you can go and purchase a Solomon's seal should you wish to do so. And if you plant one, you know, it will grow quite happily for you, but you've got to remember where you plant them, because it's one of those things that dies completely back into the ground, so it disappears. And if you don't remember where you've planted it, then you will end up digging it up, you know, because you'll dig into there and you'll start to obviously damage those rhizomes that are in there. So, you know, you do need a little bit of aide-memoire where you plant it. Oh, stocks. Are you ready? Shall I waft them in all your direction? There's nothing like a stock, is there? They just exude the most fantastic fragrance. Really quite a musky smell on the stocks. And I think, you know, once the stocks start to become available, you'll know that sort of late spring's here and, you know, we're heading towards those summer months. These are the very first of this season's British grown stocks. And again, the Lincolnshire ones are not quite ready yet, but these are the Cornish ones, and they are fantastic. Same as that, it's just joyous, isn't it? Just so, so beautiful. Stocks, when we grow them here in the UK, we grow them exceptionally well. And they're a big crop for our British flower farmers. And you can buy stocks all year round from the Dutch market, and we get imported ones that come in from Colombia and such places. But they're never quite like the British ones, because half the time the imported ones don't have the smell. They don't have that wonderful fragrance. And they never last as well, whereas the British ones are just brilliant for longevity, just go on and on. Now, whenever I'm working with stocks, I always remove a lot of the leaves. You can see that I defoliate quite heavily, because stocks are part of the cabbage family. So believe it or not, that's related to your Brussels sprouts and your broccoli and your cauliflowers and all those things. But because it is part of the cabbage family, it does mean that the leaves, once they start to deteriorate, then they smell rancid. They are really not terribly pleasant. And particularly if you've got a vase of stock, don't have any lower leaves that go below the waterline, because you will suddenly start to give the cat or the dog a dirty look, and you'll think something offensive has been deposited somewhere that you're not quite aware of. So yeah, stripping away is vital. But I like a stock, and look at that little kinky number. They do what tulips do. They twist and they turn towards the light source. So I've got a flower store just outside in a building around the back there, and that's moved in the direction where the window is. So, whatever your strongest light source is, it will hedge in that direction. But I quite like flowers that twist and turn and move about, because A, I think it makes them a little bit more charismatic, but B, it sort of changes your arrangement. And ironically, nature always arranges better than you do. It's interesting how that happens, and we can be sort of skilled in our world of floristry and flowers, but nature seems to do it far better. Don't you often find, if you're just in the countryside and you look at the local hedgerows or a water meadow or the fields where you might be walking, then the trees and all the blossom and the cow parsley and things like the bluebells and cowslips, it looks idyllic, doesn't it? You try and replicate that in your garden, never quite looks the same, does it? Because we as human beings, we can't ever really recreate nature. It can't be done. A little bit of hypericum, some good old berries here. We can get hypericum in just about every colour shade. Now if you grow it in your garden, you're probably more used to the coppery colours, the orange ones, but we can get this fantastic green one, we can get a pearly white one, we can get a peach one, we can get a lemon one, so lots and lots of different varieties of hypericum. Common name for hypericum is St. John's wort. You may have seen it for sale in Holland and Barrett. And the tablets of hypericum, they extract the essential juices from the sap of the hypericum, and then they create the St. John's wort, either tablets or medicine that you can take. And it is a relaxant. If you suffer from sort of too much nervous energy, shall we say, then you can have a hypericum tablet. That's why we florists are dead chilled, and laid back, because I think we absorb hypericum from handling it and touching it. Well, I do like these little things. I don't know how anybody else feels, but look at those, aren't they gorgeous? Now, this is a dianthus. This is related to carnations and sweet williams. And if you look at that, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like a sweet william in bud, really, doesn't it? But it stays like that. It doesn't open out. It doesn't produce a flower. But in my mind, they look like little bundles of moss. Like sort of a mossy riverbank. They've got the most fantastic texture to them. But if you're into growing your own flowers, and you're into growing to pick from the garden, then get a packet of dianthus, and you can grow these. And this is Dianthus barbatus green trick. And you can get it from seed merchants, you can get it if you go into a garden centre, and it germinates really, really easily. And it looks so lovely mixed in amongst your cut flowers and placed in vases of flowers like sweet peas, for example. Gives a really great texture to them. Strictly speaking, it's a biennial, so that means we sow it one year and it flowers the following year. But I found, although this year is an exception, I found it in past years, it'll last for about 3 years, and then it sort of suddenly dies off. Not the case this year, because everything's died off this year. Things that would normally keep going and you'd be quite confident that, they overwintered. We've had a bad winter, haven't we? And certainly for us back in my neck of the woods, that dollop of snow that we endured in March that lasted for a week and then froze really heavy was really quite detrimental. Broke a lot of branches off things, it made a lot of shrubs collapse down. So, it was not a great winter really from a garden point of view. And then before Christmas in December, I'm going to chop that off, it's getting on my nerves now. Put up with it all week, it's going today. Back in December, we had a week of really freezing cold temperatures. And back at home in my flower studio, if I was leaving buckets on the floor, they were actually freezing on the floor. So I was having to actually knock flowers out of iced buckets. But if I got them on workbenches and things, they were absolutely fine. But it was so bitter cold. I did leave heating on overnight in there to obviously stop things from absolutely getting destroyed by the frost. But I've not known that for quite a number of years. It was really quite a bit of a shock to the system, really. And then people say, oh, aren't you lucky being a florist? Working with gorgeous flowers, haven't you got the best job ever? And I think, yeah, you come and have a freezing week in my studio in December. Maybe, you know, you want to get back into that warm office as quick as you can. So for this one, really, it's sort of just celebrating the whites and greens there with little hanging lantern. And you can see how lovely a pair of those would look for a church wedding, for example, in a marquee. But equally nice, you know, you could just sit it on a side table and simply enjoy it as it is. So first design, thank you. I don't know how anybody else feels, but I love little delicate flowers, you know, little sort of wispy blooms, and there's so many gorgeous sort of small flowers at this time of year that we can work with. And if you put small flowers in something like that, they get overlooked, don't they? You miss them, you don't see them. But actually sort of mixing a few little gems from the garden and arranging those, I think is so pleasing. So I'm going to pop a few ranunculus into here. I don't know how you all feel about ranunculus, but they've become very, very fashionable. They really are quite an on-trend flower. Look at that, ladies and gentlemen. It's like a frilly ballerina's tutu, isn't it? Absolutely amazing things. And ranunculus, folks, have been around for quite a number of years. And although we think of them as quite a modern florist flower, in reality they're not. And ranunculus go back to the late 1700s, the early 1800s. And they were very much sought after. And in those days, we had what they called florist flowers. And basically things like ranunculus, primulas, auriculas, tulips, they were sort of the florist flowers. And the word florist was used very differently to how we use the word today. So it didn't refer to like a crazy creative person like me. It referred to groups of people who specialised in the growing and the development of one type of flower. So ranunculus were one of those things that people got a bit of an obsession about. And it was sort of the aspiring middle classes who were part of these floristry societies. Generally, people who worked in industrialised towns would group together, you know, of an evening, and they would organise shows, and they would exchange seeds and cuttings and bulbs, and further the development of horticulture. And we've still got, you know, one of our old original florist societies, and there's not many that are in existence that are left, that still survive, and that's in Wakefield. And in Wakefield is the oldest florist tulip society that are still there, still existing, still meeting, still getting together. And if you think about it, you know, it was all those people who worked in factories and industrialised areas who wanted to study flowers and botany and plants, because they spent half of the day surrounded by horrible machines and, you know, really unpleasant working environments. And that is where all these flowers became popular from. And of course, they've retained that popularity, haven't they? They carry on today. Well, you know, from my garden, I've just brought a few things. And, you know, people often say garden flowers don't last, you know. Leave them in the garden, they'll last a lot longer for you. I picked these on Sunday, so that's a week old now. And these are the little fritillarias, Fritillaria meleagris, snake's head fritillaries. And we grow these from a bulb, so plant a bulb in September, October time, and they will naturalise in your garden. And you'll have these gorgeous little lantern-shaped flowers starting to produce. Now you can grow these through grassland. You can grow them if you've got an orchard. Anybody got an orchard? Or a few grand orchard owners here today. You know, if you've got an orchard, they look lovely, naturalised under fruit trees and places like that. Or you can just stick them in a border, you know, and grow them in the front of the border. But you know how snowdrops start to clump up and spread? Then fritillarias do exactly the same. A lot of people think with fritillaries that they're quite a difficult thing to grow. They're not. They're quite an easy thing to grow. But again, like all bulbs, you've got to remember where you plant them so you don't end up digging them out and forgetting about them. So just have another little pink ranunculus in here. Now this little container that I'm working in, we've got a grill on the top, so it's got a metal lid that's got holes punctuated through there, so it allows me to facilitate just angling each individual stem into the container. Look at that little thing, that's a dog's tooth violet, an erythronium. So again, that was something that flowers in the border at this time of year will naturalise, will spread around. Now I don't know how you feel, but something like this reminds me of like how my granny would do flowers, you know, and how people did flowers, you know, many, many years ago. And there's something sort of quite naive and quite simple about it, but in actual fact quite pleasing. It's just a lovely way of arranging. And so often, you know, a question I often get asked is, you know, for people about sweet peas, and they'll say, you know, we pick sweet peas and they don't last, they tend to go mushy when they're in a bunch all together. And notoriously, sweet peas are not the longest of lasting of flowers. But the nice thing about if you arrange sweet peas, for example, in a container like this, as you space them through the grill, you end up with space between the flowers, so you get better air circulation, and then your flowers don't rot in the same way. So these are lovely for anything really, sweet peas or, you know, lily of the valley, little stems of cosmos, rudbeckias, any of those things look great in there. So a little bit of muscari, just pop you into there. And then I'm just going to finish off with a little bit of feathery grass. And this is one of the first garden grasses to break into flower, and it's a nice early flowering thing. I'm saying a grass, if there's any botanists here, you'll be thinking you're actually incorrect there, Jonathan, because it is in fact a sedge, if we're being botanically correct. But its common name is the sweet woodrush, and this is one of our native sedges, our native grasses. And if you want something to suppress weeds down, who doesn't want that in your gardens, ladies and gentlemen? If you want something that's a weed repressant, then this sedge is brilliant for doing that. And you can plant it under trees and shrubs or in amongst your herbaceous plants. And it's an evergreen clump forming grass. So you've always got like a little mound of clumpy grass there that stops weeds from spreading around it. But then in springtime, it rewards you with these wonderful little flowers. These are quite young at the moment. They become a little bit more fuller and then go almost like sort of bright golden lime green when they fully open out. So it really is quite pretty, but I love it for the fact that I can mix it in amongst arrangements like this. So that's just like a little bit, a corner of the garden during springtime. So that's that one, thank you. You know, flower arranging and floristry is constantly changing, constantly evolving, and, you know, gone are the days when it's all about odd numbers and half the times the height of this and 2/3 the length of this. And I can remember, you know, when I first started training to be a florist, you always had a tape measure in your toolbox because you had to sort of measure to get your proportions right. 'Cause everything was very stiff shaped, wasn't it? You know, it went triangular or it went crescent shaped, or, you know, Hogarth curves or asymmetric. So it was all about a lot of rules and a lot of regulations, which actually made it a bit intimidating, really. So for many people, they were scared to death of getting the rules and the formulas wrong. But if you think about floristry and flower arranging now, it's evolved so much, hasn't it? And if you look around this hall, you know, it's full of the most amazing, stylish designs, and everyone's different. But I think you do your flowers how you feel yourself, because the world's changed, hasn't it? We like things freer, more looser, more open, and I think all we try and do really is emulate nature. But one thing that we're trying to be, certainly in our world of floristry, is as sustainable as we possibly can. So we're trying to move away from one-use plastics. We like containers we can upcycle or use again and again. And that is the benefit of glassware, you know, glass bottles, glass jars. And you'll notice that everything around this stage is either in little bottles or little test tubes. So each one of those I can use over and over again, which I do. Downside is washing them out. You know, the dishwasher thinks, oh hell, he's back again with all those plastic bottles. I've got things in the bottom of my dishwasher you wouldn't want to know about, believe me, that comes out of a receptacle that's been at a show for a week. But one of my favourite things, every year when I've got my collection on the stand there, I have a favourite thing. These are one of my favourite things. A, because I like green. I think green's a great colour. But there's something interesting when you've got space around things. You know, when things sit flat to the floor, obviously they work, but a different dynamic is when you've got space underneath it, which is why traditionally, for any traditional flower arrangers who are here, we used to elevate things on bases, didn't we? And, you know, lift things on plinths so you've got space around. But these are just great for arranging into, which is what I'm going to do. Well, we're going to do a little bit of smelliness now. Do you like a few smelly flowers? Oh, me too. And one of the nicest things for fragrance is this narcissi. This is Narcissi Bridal Crown, and you know what? I invite you all come forward to have a sniff, because you can't leave until you've had a little smell of these, because the waft of fragrance that these emanate for a little humble little flower is so strong. And you know what, folks? If you have a bunch of these sat in a hallway or sat in your sitting room or your kitchen, wherever it may be, it will fill the room. It will absolutely fill it with fragrance. And you don't need, an artificial fragrance like a reed diffuser or a thing you plug in your electric socket or any of those type of things. Flowers can do it for us. And the nice thing about natural fragrances, they're not heavy, they don't sort of hang too strongly in the air, and you can just appreciate them for what they are. So a little bit of narcissi in there. And I'm going to pop in and get hold of them. A few of these little things, which look like bluebells, but they're not. And these are the Cornish scilla. So this is a field-grown crop that comes from Cornwall. These wonderful little bells. And this is a bit like a cross between one of our native bluebells and a hyacinth. And you can see by its stem strength, it's a lot stronger than a bluebell. And although we shouldn't pick bluebells, of course, many of us have done, haven't we? We're honest. And they don't really last, do they? Bluebells go over quite quickly. If you've got your own bluebells in your garden, of course you can pick those, that's up to you. But these, the Spanish, the Cornish scillas are fantastic, because they do look a bit like the Spanish bluebell, that's sort of invading our gardens and taking over the natural colonies of bluebells. But it's not actually that, it's a Cornish thing. But these last for about 10 days, so you get quite a lot of enjoyment from them. When I'm looking at a little flower arrangement, just even something as simple as placing a few flowers into bottles, it either works or it doesn't work for different reasons. And sort of experimenting with what goes and what doesn't go together is something that comes with practice. But when you're looking at shapes of flowers, it's always good to have a bit of contrast. So you've got a round and then you've got a point, haven't you? So if you get opposite dynamics interacting together in an arrangement, you'll get more visual interest there. So a little bit of the bluebells. And then I've got a few little roses that I'm going to pop into here, which are so, don't you think that's a pretty colour? This really gorgeous pink. Now, one thing that we're really perplexed about is the cost of flowers. Flowers have become quite an expensive thing, and since Brexit, prices just rocketed, basically. With the additional dilemma of heating costs that we all obviously experience ourselves on a personal level, it's meant that a lot of growers have actually stopped growing over the winter months. So many people who grew 52 weeks of the year have now stopped growing from October through till April time. They've said they just can't afford to heat the glass houses because it means the price of the flower will become so prohibitive. So there's a bit of a supply and demand issue going off in our flower world at the moment, which is why if we can buy British flowers, that's brilliant because we're supporting our seasonal blooms, but also, of course, we're supporting our flower farmers, who we need to look after, don't we? We need to look after our own industries here in the UK. So one of my roles within this industry is a British Flower Ambassador, which is to sort of celebrate local grown and seasonal flowers, but also, we want to try and get flowers to be attainable still for everybody. Wouldn't it be sad if they become an elitist thing and you couldn't afford to buy flowers? And certainly if you go in your supermarket, supermarkets sell flowers often as a loss leader because they don't put a profit margin on there. But that makes it really tough for florists. So, don't forget your local florists and please do support them. So just my little green bottles there, you can see how quick and easy it is to make something like that. Just takes no time at all. Well, don't you think that's a nice display to make? And also, thank you. And also, don't you think that's a lovely way of giving flowers? If you're just going out and giving a gift for someone for a birthday or a celebration, just a great way of showing them that you're thinking about them. Right, I've got that much stuff down here, I don't know which way to go. I'm going to use something that I love next. I don't know how you are, but I absolutely adore parrot tulips. Parrot tulips are one of my all-time favourite flowers. And, the old parrot tulips, they're quite an interesting thing because they've become so fashionable. And if you get a bulb catalogue or a sort of seed catalogue coming through in autumn time, it's always full, isn't it, of loads and loads of different parrot tulips that you can buy and put in the garden. But I do find with some of the more exotic type of tulips, they don't come back again. They're like one-hit wonders. And that is why a lot of our growers, when they're growing commercially, they treat tulips as an annual. So like we would grow bedding plants, they treat the tulips as an annual. But when I go and visit our big flower farms in Lincolnshire, and it's the end of the tulip season, it seems quite wrong when they've got compost heaps full of old tulip bulbs. And there's that little bit of me thinking, I want a bag full of those, just to stick them in and see if they do come again. And I have been known to bring bags of the tulips home and stick them in. Now sometimes you get flowers, not always huge flowers, but you do get flowers on them. But I can remember always the very first year when I did the big tulip festival at Chatsworth. And I've been lucky enough to design 10 flower festivals at Chatsworth House, but the first one was all about tulips. And it was a bit of a traumatic year for that festival, because the tulips that the gardeners were growing at Chatsworth, specifically for the festival, had tulip blight. And that's an airborne fungal disease, and unfortunately it sort of struck the tulips that they were growing. So I had to fall back on the Lincolnshire tulip growers to provide backup tulips for us. But some did flower, there were some in pots and tubs that did flower. And at the end of it, when they emptied all the pots and tubs out, they let the volunteers who were involved in the flower festival take the tulip bulbs home afterwards. But I thought, you know what, I'm not wasting my time, because they won't come back again, because they'd all been forced under glass, so I knew they wouldn't sort of be worth messing with. But can you imagine, all the tulips that they planted, out of all of them, about 20% flowered, 80% just came up blind because of the blight, which is not great, is it? But if we were back in Holland in the 1780s, tulip mania would be streaking through what they would then the Low Countries, which we now know as the Netherlands, and you'd be going absolutely mad for a tulip. And if you were here and watching me use a tulip, then I'd be the equivalent of Elon Musk, basically, because you'd have to be so rich to own tulips of any quantity. And people just went absolutely berserk over tulips. And what caused tulip mania was when they actually started to see different colour strains coming through in the tulips, because generally they were all sort of one shade originally, and they came from the Ottoman Empire, from Turkey. But then this sort of strange streaking and striping and flecking started to happen in the tulips, and people went mad. They were the most desired thing to hold and have. So entire fortunes were exchanged speculating over bulbs. But we all know from a little bulblet, it takes 3 or 4 years for that to flower. So they were gambling on something that they didn't know existed, or didn't know if it would come back as they thought it was going to be. And it didn't, basically. Because all these little things that were happening to the tulips were again a disease, which was spread by the peach aphid. So they were gambling on something that nature was controlling, really. And the Dutch government, or the Netherlands government, they banned speculating on tulip bulbs because the entire economy crashed. So now we have our banking crashes. The Dutch tulip market was the first national banking crisis, the first national banking crash. And it's hard to imagine it was all over that, isn't it? But if you lived in Amsterdam and you're in one of those posh canal houses, if you ever go to Amsterdam or Delft or Haarlem or any of those Dutch cities, if you look on the second floor, they've always got massive big windows. And those big windows were done so they could display the wealth. So they would put the best furniture, the best piece of Delftware, a picture behind, a Rembrandt, whatever it might be behind there. And then you and your husband, or you and your wife, would sit there in your regalia, your finest clothes, but always on that table you would have a tulip. And that would show that, you were so wealthy that you'd have a tulip there. Or when the tulips had finished flowering, you'd have a painting of your tulip in your house. So, they were indicative of wealth. So quite fascinating for a flower. But if you do go to Amsterdam, and you're wandering around, you might see other things in other windows that I'm not even telling you about. So. Just look for the tulips, folks. So this one I'm just putting in, can you see, a little bit of pussy willow, a little bit of branch in there. This is some heather that I've just arranged in amongst it, which just gives a nice sort of softer texture there. Then I'm just going to put a slightly little bit more twigginess into here from some Vaccinium, which is this little chap. So a few wiry stems. But again, that's not cost a fortune. It's probably 10 stems of tulips in there, a couple of stems of heather, But you could pick things from your garden, couldn't you? You could go out this time of year, pick some hellebores, they would look great in there, some muscari, you might have all the primulas, the denticulatas out in your garden, pick those. It's just an easy little quick way of arranging a few flowers. Thank you. Well, I really don't know anybody who doesn't like flowers in an urn. An urn's a classic container, isn't it? It always works. And I just think they always look elegant, don't they, flowers in an urn? And I'm sort of talking back about Holland in the day, but, you know, our classical stately homes, you know, around here, for example, places like Harewood House or, you know, maybe Newby Hall or Bolton Abbey, you know, those type of places, they would always have a nice big display in an entrance hall. You know, they would knock up a display of flowers, which again was showing off what you've got in your gardens. And generally in this country, and I don't mean this rudely in any way, but generally in this country, most people who are florists are females. We don't have so many male florists here. It's completely the opposite in the continent. You know, it's probably about a 50-50 split. But traditionally, here in the UK, it was the head gardeners who did all the flower arrangements at the big stately homes and the big country houses. And the head gardeners were the one who would decorate the tables for Christmas and, you know, create all these fantastic displays. The head gardeners would also be the one who would do the big hall arrangements, the entrance arrangements. And back in the late 1700s, they actually started to produce books on arranging flowers for stately homes, although they didn't call them stately homes then like we do. And, you know, head gardeners would vie for getting the latest sort of look to a table arrangement or the latest look for a Christmas or Easter table display. So it was quite competitive, really. And when I'm in here on Wednesday night and all the lovely folks are entering these competitive classes, you know, back in the day it would have been full of head gardeners in here entering competitive classes. But it's now people from floristry colleges and flower arranging clubs and societies up and down the area. So a little bit of eucalyptus in here. So just letting this sort of start to flop out. I've just got chicken wire into the centre of the urn just to facilitate angling and holding the stems in place. Well, for me, you know, floristry is not only a passion, but it is really a way of life. Every day I'm somewhere arranging flowers, doing something different, or you know, might be teaching, might be doing a flower school day, it might be doing some consultancy work for the industry, it might be visiting British flower growers, might be writing articles for a magazine, might be recording something for TV. So, you know, there's always different aspects to what I do, but always involves flowers. You know, flowers are the one consistent that's always there. But, you know, I always hark back to my early days of floristry, where a very senior florist said something that's been quite poignant really throughout my career, and I'll never forget it really. And she said, "I'll give you a bit of advice, Jonathan." She said, "Always remember, you're only as good as your flowers." And it's quite a true thing, that, isn't it? And it made me realise quite early on, if you look after flowers, they'll look after you. And you can't cut corners with that. So quite often when I'm at sort of shows such as this, or some of the big RHS shows, you know, people will come and they'll see me sort of clipping and preparing all my flowers and doing what we call conditioning, which is really how we pre-treat the flowers. And they'll say, "Don't you have other people who do this for you?" And yes, very kindly, I do have people who help and assist. But I'm not that sort of divish person who says, "Oh, get all that done." I like to do it and check it's being done right, because I know if my flowers haven't been conditioned and, you know, defoliated correctly or cut correctly, I know that by the time I'm on the second day of the show, they're going to be past the best and going over. So, you know, you only are as good as how you look after your flowers. So conditioning is vital. And it possibly looks, or at least I hope it looks, that when I'm stood up here, it looks fairly effortless. And it looks so, you know, it's like just sticking them in without thinking about it. But really, from 8 o'clock this morning, I've been getting ready. So, you know, I've been packing all my buckets, preparing all my buckets. And in my head, when I'm putting all these flowers in here, I'm thinking how it's going to look and what I'm going to do with it. But equally, you know, all these things have been given a good long drink in deep, clean, cold water. There's always flower food added to that water. They're kept somewhere away from direct sunlight. They're kept out of drafts or cold. So, you know, you've got to nurture and protect your flowers. And if you do that, then obviously they'll reward you by lasting a lot longer. And as you can see here, you know, everything now nearly a week old is still looking as fresh as a daisy, with the exception of me, perhaps. I need somebody to condition me. We have a funny product in floristry, and it's called Chrysal Professional Glory. And we only tend to use it really for wedding work. And it's a preservative, and as you spray, if I spray it on those flowers there, they'll just stay. So they don't open anymore, they just stay at that peak of perfection. So, for example, if you're using peonies, you know, you don't want a peony to fully blow, it will just hold it. So it is quite a useful thing. But sometimes, you know, when I'm working with that, I think, I wonder what would happen if you did yourself each day on that. Do you think you'd just stay exactly as you are? It's a bit late in the day now. I think I'd have liked to have started when about 25, and it might have worked. So in there, look, we've just got foliage, haven't we? We've got some pendulous eucalyptus, some parvifolia eucalyptus, a little bit of pistache. And, you know, even if you can't afford flowers, there's nothing wrong with an arrangement of just all green, is there? All green works, you know, it's nice to enjoy. And actually, ladies and gentlemen, being around greenery is good because green's a really soothing, calming colour. And there are sort of schools of thought out there that, you know, it's now very on trend. I don't know if anybody's done it, and I certainly haven't. Well, I have unintentionally, but that's another story. But there's things like forest bathing. You know, you can go and pay money now, can't you, to immerse yourself in a woodland floor and look up at trees. Well, if you dog walk and it's muddy, I've done that a few times without wanting to, and you know, ended up fairly prostrate without it being my intention, looking up at the trees. But yeah, so sort of be surrounded by greenery and foliage and nature, you know, it's good for our well-being, it's good for our emotional and our mental health. So just place it into here, a little bit of heather. Now, have you got serious heather envy going on? Yes. Because I don't know about you folks, but my heathers are short, stocky, clumpy, low-growing ground cover things. But this is like the Rolls Royce of heather. And this, actually, is a tree heather. So this is a commercially grown floristry tree heather. This comes over from Cork in Southern Ireland. So this is grown just for the floristry industry. And it has quite a short season. It's only around for about 6 weeks. But when it is around, I love using it. And why I love using it is it lasts for so long. It lasts for about 2 months. So you get loads and loads of enjoyment out of it. It's a very pretty thing, isn't it? It reminds me of sort of home and Derbyshire and the moors, or, you know, for any of you sort of Ilkley and that type of area where you've got that amazing moorland, or, you know, that wonderful coastal road over the Pickering Moors to Whitby. You know, it's fantastic if you go in August, isn't it? When all the heather's out and in full bloom. We won't wish our lives away. We don't want August yet, do we? So into here next, I'm going to again go for some more stocks. So a riot of fantastic stocks into here. Place those in there. Now I'm doing this as an all-round design, but you could do it as a facing arrangement if it's going up against a wall. And I hope you're all inspired. I expect you all to knock one of these up for your hallway when you get home. Invite your friends round for coffee tomorrow. You know, when people come to visit me, inevitably they have an expectation that there's like flowers everywhere, which generally there isn't. And normally my arrangements are like in these little bottles, you know, it's heads that have broken off when I've been working in the studio. I've just took them into the kitchen and dropped them into little bottles. But certain times, you know, when sort of something special is happening, then I do sort of create, you know, formal arrangements for the house, for the hallway, or wherever it might be. And people will always come in and they'll say, oh, it must be lovely having this on a weekly basis. I think, no, this doesn't happen on a weekly basis. But sometimes, you know, if I'm absolutely honest, occasionally you've got more arrangements than you desire or you need. Because I do a regular class on Thursdays, and every week, you know, we make a new arrangement. Perhaps it's a week when I've had a workshop and we've made 2 or 3 designs on the workshop. So, you know, all those arrangements come home with me. And then, as I mentioned, if you look after them, they keep going on and lasting so much longer. So occasionally, you know, you're at a stage when you do look like a pop-up flower shop, because you've got an arrangement on every, you know, side table or every windowsill. So at that stage, it's like when the cleaner comes, I'm like, Helen, take an arrangement home with you. Or, the next door neighbour, do you want an arrangement this week? I've got a spare one going. This is at the stage usually afterwards when people come up and say, I'd love to be your neighbour. But you can see, once you've got a base of foliage, how easy it is to angle your flowers in. And notice how sort of the foliage is holding everything into position. It's keeping it all where I want it to go, so nothing's sort of wobbling and moving around freely. Oh, I wish you could, can you smell it on the front row? It does smell absolutely amazing. Aren't we lucky here in life, really? A lovely Sunday day, you're surrounded by beautiful flowers, you're in this arena full of creativity, and you've got a wonderful show to go and explore afterwards. What's not to like about that? Don't you find it fascinating when people say, if you've got sort of other friends or family members and you say you come into a flower show, particularly people who are perhaps a little bit younger sometimes, and they'll say, that sounds boring. It's not boring at all, is it really? There's so much to enjoy about it. And what I love about flowers and floristry, ladies and gentlemen, is it's there for any age, isn't it? Whatever age you are, you can create an arrangement. Whatever age you are, you can plant a tub up, you can do a hanging basket, a window box, or you can go out and tend your garden. And gardening is one of the best workouts, isn't it? If we're in a sporting hobby or a sporting industry, you get to an age and you have to hang up your rugby kit or your football boots or your badminton racket, don't you? Because the old joints start aching and it becomes a little bit too physically demanding. But gardening is quite a gentle workout, isn't it? It's something that you can do at your own pace, in your own time. And it's great being out there amongst your plants and enjoying your plants. For me, really, a flower arrangement is just like bringing the garden indoors. And all I feel like I'm doing is really just bringing nature to share my own home. And I do know as well that having flowers around me is good for me. It's proven that flowers do release in your brain positive endorphins. So they release those sort of chemicals that make us feel happy, that make us feel smiling. So, if you're doing that, then your mental health's in a good place. So it really is important. And that's why so many times when people come on a flower school weekend or a course or a class, they'll say, you know what, while we've been doing this, we've not thought about anything else. We've just been immersed into that arrangement. And that is the power that flowers have. But, with all these things, we want them to last for as long as possible. So I always harp on about this, and I know many of you will have heard me before, but do spray your flowers, mist your flowers. If you can spray twice a day, just with a little atomizer, then on average, it lasts 5 days longer. And that is proven by the Flower Council. Did research on in their scientific department over in Holland, and by wetting leaves and stems and petals, it's soaking all that moisture in through every area, so your flowers are going to go on a lot longer for you. Always use flower food in the water. That is so beneficial to the longevity of the flowers. You notice that I cut with a knife, and by cutting with a knife, you're not squashing stems. So we're aiming to do a clean cut where stem damage is minimalised. If you can't get used to working with a knife, then make sure you cut with flower scissors. These are carbon bladed flower scissors. They're fantastic things. These are from Japan. They will just literally eat through a stem. If you struggle with arthritis or you find it hard to exert pressure, these little mini snips are brilliant, because for a really woody stem, they'll eat through it. Through a soft stem, like a ranunculus, for example, they'll chew through there. Or even a really, really thick stem. So, from a branch like that, again, they'll just eat through. So they're fantastic to work with. Don't use your bypass gardening secateurs, don't use your kitchen scissors, because they're not designed for cutting stems, and they'll hack through it and they'll damage your stems. So right tools for the right job is absolutely crucial. But something that I think is brilliant are these, which they're called bonsai shears, but they're actually what the Japanese use for their ikebana flower arrangement. They are so strong and so stiff, and if you're like me, occasionally you need to do a little bit of gorilla pruning. They're extremely discreet in your back pocket, and they don't have, unlike those, a bright red handle, so you can get away with it a lot easier. And I will just finish off by mentioning, if anybody's interested, just down in Hall 1, if you go onto the Visit Harrogate stand. They're doing a competition where you can win free tickets to next autumn's Nuba flower show. So go and enter that competition, and they tell you all about the gardens that we've got in this area that are open to visit. And also on the back wall I've created a flower frame there, so please do go and take a look. And because I got so many complaints last year that I'd not done a calendar, I'm on it this year. I've done a calendar again this year, and also there's a brand new range of my greeting cards, which all have got my own flower arrangements, all of which have been created out of garden flowers from the garden, so just on the stand at the back there. You've been an absolute joy to talk to this morning. It's been really lovely sharing some flower talk. Thank you very much. Thank you, that's so kind. We have got demonstrations taking place here throughout the day. There's another one on the hour at 12 o'clock. I'm back again on here at 2 o'clock. Got an amazing Elaine Bedford coming on next, a real creative genius. If you're down in Hall 2 at 1 o'clock, again, a different demonstration down there. So enjoy the rest of the day, folks. Thank you.